Hey there, my fellow designers and creatives. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another video in the ultimate guide to become a product designer. In this video, I'm going to show you how to learn from design guidelines and why it is extremely critical that you understand the human interface guidelines and material guidelines very well, because this is going to help you differentiate yourself as a designer compared to everybody else you're competing with. So without any further ado, let's get started. Now, here I have a quick example of a very small interaction. So in this case, when the washer is being reserved for you, you have 10 minutes to pick it up and you tap on cancel, right? Now I designed this thing over here, but what is important to understand is this the right answer? How do you know that this is the right answer, and how do other apps do it? What does the guidelines say? What does the material design guidelines say? What does the human interface guidelines say? Is this the right way to design it for both Android and iOS? Is this the way to design it only for iOS? If this is for iOS, how do you design it for Android? You as a designer need to have answers to all of these questions, and it is extremely critical that you know the answers. Now, the first thing that you need to do is to figure out what other apps do it if you don't really know what the answer is, right? And how do you figure out what other apps do? Which means you need to find a similar use case, right? And in this use case, you are actually canceling something that you are doing, or you are or something that has happened, right? And this isn't like canceling an order from a food delivery app or canceling an order from an e-commerce platform, right? This is just canceling the action that you are just did or you're about to do, right? Something along those lines. And the nearest that I could think of are social media apps, right? Now, there might be other examples, but social media apps were more than enough for me to understand what to do over here, right? So if I come down over here, I have multiple apps over here, and all of them have the same behavior, but the UI is completely different. Let's take an example. So here I have Twitter. In Twitter, when I typed something, I'm trying to create a tweet and I cancel it, tap on the cancel button, I get this bottom sheet with the delete and save draft and cancel. When I do the same thing on Facebook, I get something else, right? The functionality is the same. I have three options. I can save draft, I can discard post, delete, or I can keep editing, which is basically cancel. When I do it on LinkedIn, the UI looks very different. All right. So over here, it is save draft, delete draft, and continue sharing. And on Instagram, again, both of these, they look very different. All right. And on Swiggy, for example, we get something very different, which is a dialog box over here. Okay. And here is another example where we have this thing, which we actually call as an action sheet. And this is the native design of the action sheet, right? Technically, these two are also action sheets, but they are customizable. So now if you have 6 options, what do you pick? What is right? What is wrong? Now, Twitter is a big app. Facebook is a big app. LinkedIn is a big app. Instagram is a big app. And all of them are choosing 4 different options. So how do you pick which is the right option? How do you understand what is the right and what is wrong? And what are the name of these things? And are these apps using it correctly? Right? So in order for us to make a decision over here, it all goes down to understanding what are the design guidelines. So the first thing is to understand what are these components even called, right? So let me take you to the human interface guidelines and explain. Okay, so here I am in the human interface guidelines. Now let's try to find those components. Now, all of these are not content related stuff, so we're going to skip. All of these are not layout and organization. We can skip that as well. These are not lockups or split views or tab views. Menus and actions. All right. What is an activity view? Let's see if this is an activity view. And as you can see, activity view is basically the share sheet that you get from the bottom of the screen. So it's definitely not that. I'm going to go back. We have buttons, context menus. These are not menus, of course. Here you have navigation and search. And now finally, we come down to presentation. Okay. So here is where everything is. Now let's look at the other one. We don't have selection and input. It's definitely not one of this, and it's not the native status rating indicators or any of that, and it's not live activities. It's not a notification. It's none of these, right? So it is from presentation. Now let's look at action sheet. That is the first thing over here. Okay, so you can see that the UI is very similar to this one, as you can see over here, right? The one on Instagram. This is exactly how it looks. Okay, so that's one. Let's go back again to the previous screen. We also have alerts. All right. Alert is basically this. And if I were to look at an example, this is what we have. And this is exactly similar to what Facebook did with this thing. All right. Now we also have a couple more options over here, right? One, we have this thing, which is in the center of the screen. And this thing over here is some sort of a bottom sheet. It's technically a modal, right? Now this thing, as you can see over here, is actually created by Twitter, right? This is not from the code base made by Apple. If you see over here, right, the alert that you see over here is provided by Apple itself. The only thing you can customize are the colors, you can customize the number of buttons, you can customize the, the copy over here. But this element that you see over here is created by Apple, and it's a component created by Apple. This is what we call as a native element. All right. The same thing coming down here to the action sheet. All right. If I come down and scroll over here, I don't think they have an iOS version, they have an watchOS version. But anyway, as you can see over here, this is again a native element, right? We can customize the elements over here. We can make it look different, but this is again a native element. All right. If I go back again, let's see if we can go back to the list over here. So if you look at the other ones, right? Scroll view, it's definitely not a scroll view because you can't really scroll. A window is definitely a different window altogether, which is more of a Mac OS thing. We also have sheets. So let's see what a sheet is. All right. As you can see over here, sheet is basically some sort of a bottom sheet like this. And this is exactly what you see over here in Twitter. It's basically a sheet. We just call it a bottom sheet because it's coming from the bottom. Then we have popovers. It's definitely not a popover. Now, you might think what a popover is similar to an alert, but this is basically like a tooltip that comes out like this, which is more of a macOS behavior. You can also see that it's there in iOS as well. What else do we have? We have panels as well. Panels is something that's quite different, which is basically, again, something like this, like these HUD style panels, right? So this is again not that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Mobbin and show you what they are called there. Now here I'm in Mobbin. I'm going to come down to UI elements and I'm going to search for that. So basically overlay. All right. So let's look at all of them, right? So we have first one is a menu. Okay. And menu is basically that something that you see over here, Now this is also called as a context menu in human interface guidelines. So if I come down over here and if I show you this thing, which is context menus, as you can see over here, it's weird that they don't have a design over here, but basically it's something which is very similar to this. This is called a context menu. As you can see, this is again, all of these is a menu. All right. Now, this is not what we have. Right? In a menu, you're sort of looking for browsing options, right? Like desert and add-on and coffee. But in our case, it was quite different. In our case, we have save, draft, discard, and post, right? These are three different types of actions, right? But these are options to choose from, right? Let's go to dialog. Now, dialog, as you see over here, is basically what we saw in Swiggy, right? As you can see over here. Now, now this is a material design component, and it's not really a human interface guideline component. And I'm going to show you that a little bit later. All right. So as you can see over here, everything that's in the center is called a dialog, right? It's in the center. Nothing is at the bottom of the screen. All right. Now you can also see that this that you see over here, which is actually called an alert, is also being categorized as a dialog. Now, this I think is very incorrect, but it's fine because we don't really have a separate overlay option called as alert, right? We don't have a separate option called as alert, which is why Mobbin is actually combining dialog and alerts together. All right. But in reality, the technical term is called as an alert. Let's go down to tooltip. Tooltip is definitely different. We have snack bar and toast, which is not really a native component. As you can see, each of these look very different. So we don't want to do that. Now we have the action sheet, and action sheet is basically what we saw over here. Some of these are customized and some of these are just native. So as you can see over here, they all pretty much look the same. All of these are action sheets. And then we have bottom sheet, right? The one that we saw over here in the human interface guidelines. If I come down here to sheets, we want to go to presentation, then we have sheets over here, right? So anything that comes from the bottom of the screen, as you can see over here, right? So as you can see, you have two options. You have a large sheet and then a small sheet as well. Okay. Now the same thing in the bottom sheet, as you can see, we have a tall version of it, which pretty much takes up your entire screen. And then you have something called as a full screen overlay, which is sort of like a new screen itself altogether. Right? So now let's go to the human interface guidelines and read a couple of things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the alerts section. Okay. And now let's read it. An alert gives people critical information that they need right away. Okay, it's giving critical information. Okay, so for example, an alert can tell people about a problem, warn them of an action that might destroy data, and give them an opportunity to confirm a purchase or any other important action they initiated. Right now, in our case, it's not a problem, right? Warning them about warn them when an action might destroy data. Right, in this case it's not about destroying data, but in our case it's about canceling the reservation. Right, and give them an opportunity to confirm a purchase. Here there's nothing that has anything to do with purchase or an other important action that they initiated. Here again, the other important action that they had initiated was reserving, and now you're canceling that. Okay, now let's understand the best practices. Use alerts sparingly. Okay, alerts give people important information, but they interrupt the current task to do so. Obviously, in our case, we are interrupting the user. All right, we encourage people to pay attention to alerts by making certain that each one offers only essential information and useful actions. Right, and in our case, if you see over here in Facebook, it's only providing the most important information. It is saying, save this post as a draft. If you discard, you will lose this post, right? So this is very clearly an alert, and it is being used for the right use case. But let's see if that holds good, right? So avoid using an alert merely to provide information. So if the user does not have to take an action, don't show an alert. In this case, we want the user to take an action, so we can discard this point, right? So when we look at it, it sort of feels like an alert is an okay option. It feels like we can use an alert. Now let's go to action sheets over here and see what there is. Here, an action sheet is a modal view that presents choices related to an action people initiate, right? So this feels more sensible in our case. Okay, let's look over here. Best practices. Use an action sheet, and it's telling you to use an action sheet, not an alert, to offer choices related to an intentional action. Okay, so for example, when people cancel the mail message they are editing, right, an action sheet provides 3 choices: delete, save, return to editing. This is exactly what the other apps are doing. This is what Instagram is doing. This is what LinkedIn is doing. And here is another app, and this is also so we can ignore this example. We can focus only on this. Now, if you look at the design, even though this is a bottom sheet of Twitter, right, they sort of look and behave like the action sheet itself. It's just that this visually looks different. These action sheets are native elements, and this bottom sheet is a custom element that is created by the designers and engineers at Twitter. Okay, now what that means is, even in this case, Swiggy could also have actually used an action sheet or a bottom sheet, but they still chose to use a dialogue. So although an alert can also help people confirm or cancel the action that has destructive consequences, it doesn't provide additional choices related to the action. So here it is saying that although an alert can also help people confirm or cancel an action, it doesn't provide additional choices related to the action. More importantly, an alert is usually unexpected, generally telling people about a problem or a change in the current situation that might require them to act. So you can see over here, the key differentiating factor is that an alert is being shown when it is usually unexpected. Now, here is the interesting thing. In our case over here, when the user taps on cancel anywhere over here, the user is expecting to see something. So which means that it cannot be an alert, because an alert is supposed to be unexpected in nature, which means Facebook is doing the wrong implementation. And we have enough proof of it. We have other apps that are following very similar patterns, and only Facebook is doing something else. All right. So what that means, in my use case, I could have actually designed an action sheet also for this, but I just chose to design a modal sheet, right? Modal sheet is more custom. You can customize it as much as you want. But an action sheet feels like a native thing. And since I'm not using any native elements, except for this, I don't have a choice other than to use this element. I cannot custom code this element. I have to use this element itself because the actions will be triggered only from this element. Right? So I don't have a choice here. But in this case, I have a choice. I chose to use a modal sheet over here because I feel it looks visually better. Right? It looks like it's part of the same design. But I still could have used an action sheet. Right? So this is enough to understand that an action sheet or a bottom sheet behavior is more suitable than an alert. Okay? Now let's go to the material design guidelines and see what they have in store to offer. Now, here I'm in material design. Now, coming down to components, let's look. We have common buttons, we have extended FAB, it's none of these. We have communication, we have snack bars, we have progress indicators, we have badges, none of these. Here we have containment, right? We have cards, we have dialogues, all right? Bottom sheet and dialogues are the only two things that we saw. We don't have dividers, lists. It's not a navigation item. It's not a selection item or a control. It's not a text input, right? So we only have bottom sheet and dialogues. So let's look at bottom sheets, or actually let's look at dialogues. So we have an overview, right? So dialogues can require an action, communicate information, help users accomplish a task. You have two types, basic and a full screen. So we are definitely looking at the basic one. Let's go down to the guidelines and see if we can do it, right? So I'm not going to read any of this. I'm just going to read the do's and don'ts over here. So use dialogues for prompts that block an app's normal operation, and for critical information that requires a user's specific task, decision, or acknowledgement. So here we want the user to make a decision, right? So which is why they're using a dialog box. Now in the material design guidelines, there is no such thing called as an action sheet. There is no such thing called an alert. The only option you have is a dialog box, all right? You don't have any other option. And this is what we saw in Swiggy, right? So that's pretty much it. And it's very straightforward, right? And this is an anatomy. We don't really care about this. I can go back over here and let's try to search for, oh, this is in alphabetical order. So let me just go back. Let's go to here, which is a bottom sheets. All right. Now the bottom sheet, as you will see, it says a standard bottom sheet and a modal bottom sheet, right? What's the difference between a standard bottom sheet and a modal bottom sheet, right? They both look the same. Now I know the difference already because I can see the difference, but let me show you what it actually is. Okay. So the bottom sheet displays supplementary content and actions. Now the thing is, the bottom sheet can be used for any purpose. It can be used for anything. There's no guidelines around it. So here we have the modal bottom sheets. The difference between a modal bottom sheet and a normal bottom sheet is that if you see over here, the standard bottom sheets are elevated over the main UI, so their visibility is not affected by panning or scrolling. This is exactly like maps. But in modal bottom sheets, right, a modal bottom sheet must be interacted with or dismissed, right? It has to be dismissed. It is blocking the behavior, such as in the Files app. And as you can see here, it gets grayed out. But in the other case over here, it's not grayed out. It's just supplementary and it is complementing the interface behind, right? So technically what Twitter designed was a modal bottom sheet. So if you go back to Figma, this is a modal bottom sheet, which I have to dismiss. And this is also a modal, but it's sort of like a dialog box, right? Because it looks similar to that. And it is specifically for a user to take a certain action over here, right? Or to acknowledge something. So what that means is Swiggy could have also used an action sheet. Swiggy could have also used a bottom sheet like this, but it chose to go ahead and do this because maybe they wanted to provide more information, and it also keeps the design consistent, right? Maybe they're using maybe they're using dialog boxes in many places across the entire app. So to keep that design consistent, they decided to use a dialog box every single place. Now, let me explain something even more interesting. So I've taken 3 screenshots over here, and I'm going to focus on the first one for now. Now, I'm going to bring out this one, which was the one that we had in Instagram, all right? And then I'm going to bring this out one as well, right? So both of these are from Instagram. Now, the one on the left is basically where I'm adding a post. I'm creating a post and I'm sort of discarding. And the second one is where I'm discarding a story. Now, in essence, both of these are doing the same actions. It's just the only difference is that this is for a post and this is for a story, right? But if you see, the UI is very different. Right here we have an alert which says, do you want to discard media, discard, save draft, and cancel. Here do you want to discard media, which image edits, which is discard saved and save draft and cancel, right? Now, this can be very confusing to a lot of people, and in fact, it is very confusing. So which is right? Is this the right answer or is this the right answer, right? Now, even after reading the guidelines, now it's getting even more confusing. So how do you make a decision? Now, the thing here is that sometimes you need to understand that the design guidelines are not rules, right? That is the most fundamental thing that you need to understand. It's called a guideline for a reason, or else it would have been called material design rules or human interface rules, right? So basically what ideally happened here is, and this is my guess, that in Instagram, there were two teams. One is a story team, which is in charge of stories, and there's another team which is in charge of engagement and posting. So they both used native components, but they sort of didn't communicate with each other. And so there's an inconsistency in the design, even though the actual action and the intent in this case is very similar. So now when we look back to all of this, right, it feels that all of these are correct answers, right? This is a correct answer. This is a correct answer. This is a correct answer. This is an action sheet. This is an alert. And this is a bottom sheet, right? All of these are correct, and it feels like the dialog box is also correct, right? So in some cases, it then comes down to consistency, it comes down to visual direction, it comes down to what is a good experience for the user, right? So in this case, if they had used an action sheet, even in case of discarding a story, it would have been fine, but they didn't do it, but they used an alert instead, which is also fine, right? So as long as the user experience is fine, right, it's fine if you're using different components. The point is to make sure that the experience feels natural, right? So that's something that's very interesting to think about. Now, here is another example, something that's very interesting. You've seen a lot of apps where they ask you for, contact permission, location permission, notification permission. But some of them have a design that looks like this, and some of them have a design that looks like this. Now, in hindsight, if you really have to enable notifications or location, you need to do it from an element, which is this component, which is an alert, which is very much connected from a backend standpoint to your actual phone, right? You cannot provide permission when you tap on a button like this. Now, what happens here is that both of these are exactly the same screens and they are the same app, right? Now, what happened is when you see a message that says get notified about new messages, people and more, turn on push notifications. When you tap on OK, that then transitions to this screen, right, where this second alert comes up, right? Now, the reason they do this is because it's a very much of a visual decision that they have taken, right? They could have ideally shown this in the beginning itself, but they want to introduce their brand and make it feel less robotic, right? Because the moment you show this, it might feel quite robotic. So you try to be a little playful and creative, and then you bring in another alert. Now, ideally, I am not really a fan of this sort of a pattern because it is two additional buttons that I need to tap on for me to provide notifications, and this is not really adding value. So I would have directly showed this screen itself instead of showing this screen, right? But when you are designing, you need to know that location or any other permission cannot be provided just by tapping on an OK on an element that is custom built, right? It has to be triggered from a native element that looks like this. Now, this can be customized to an extent where you can change the text, you can change the buttons, you can change the colors, you can change the fonts and all of those things. To an extent, you can change that. But if you're building something from scratch, then this component is not really connected to the device. But this component is, because this is a native component that is provided by Apple. And the same thing applies to Google as well. So these are some of the other things that you need to think about. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing, awesome content. I'll see you guys in the next video. So then take care and bye-bye.